Welcome to the Selling Show, where we unpack, repack, and break down exactly how top experts sell their ideas, their value, and their services. This is your host, David Newman, and you are in the right place if you want better clients, bigger deals, and higher fees. Authenticity. Have you heard this term, authenticity? You think it's important? You think it's valuable? You think it'll help you lead smarter, sell more, be a better leader, be someone who people want to follow? Well, if you don't yet, you're about to, because I have the CEO of the Authentic Universe with us. Erin Hatzikostas, welcome. It is such a joy to have you here.
So good to be here. Best intro ever. Thank you.
I'm just going to read 2 lines from the bio on your website, and then we'll dig into like the real deal. But I just found this so cool. Erin is the best-selling author of You Do You-ish, a TEDx and keynote speaker, a coach-sultant, and the co-host of an offbeat career and leadership podcast, Because with Erin and Nicole. Erin's talks have reached hundreds of thousands of people, and her thought leadership has been featured on ABC, CBS, and published in Business Insider, Fast Company, Well and Good, and many, many, many more. So that's the current Erin story. I want to go back, and I would love to hear the backstory of what was your professional journey that brought you to the work that you're doing today, and what were some interesting pit stops along the way?
Yeah. So, of course, it wasn't linear at all. And my career started my sophomore year in high school, serendipitously, and in college, actually. And I had just dropped out of engineering. I didn't like it, and I was horrible at it. But I was still taking math classes, and my roommate came home one day from class. I'll never forget it. And she was flies into the room like she's like Kramer on Seinfeld, and she's like, "Oh my God, Erin, I found it! I found the career for you." And of course, I was like, "Okay, Amy, whatever." And then she's like, "No, it's high pay, low stress." It's like, "Okay, I'm listening. You have to be good at math, and you're the only person I know who's good at math." And then she dropped the bomb. She's like, "It's called an actuary."
Oh, that's an exciting career. I know about them.
Well, and this is 1996, right? So no Googling how cool or uncool actuarial profession was. So, but I sort of call myself an instant gratification whore. I'm very easily excitable. And so the next day I was at the library running up 4 flights of stairs to all the books that would tell me about what an actuary was, except there were 0, except for just this pamphlet, this beige 4x6 pamphlet that gave you the address, the phone numbers, and the names of the companies who hired actuaries. And so being the smart cookie that I was, I quickly noticed a pattern. Many of them were in Connecticut. I had waited tables with somebody that I can't even remember the last name of to this day that lived in Connecticut, because I was in Michigan, grew up in Michigan, and I was off to the races. And I somehow sort of swindled. I told maybe a little bit of a white lie to Aetna, one of the large insurance companies. I said, "Well, I'm already going to be out in Connecticut for spring break, so you might as well interview me." Of course, I had no plans, no plane ticket, to which they agreed. And then I later found out for other people, they had purchased their plane ticket. And I thought, well, that's what you get for telling a white lie. But who knows if they would have interviewed me if I hadn't. And so then I was offered the job as an intern, came back the next year as a full-time sort of, they call it an actuarial student, but basically in the actuarial profession. And then I spent the next 3 years taking actuarial exams while I worked. And then I spent the next 3 years failing actuarial exams as I worked. I didn't pass a single one, which is quite humbling as somebody who graduated, second in her class and always had done pretty well. But nobody, that pamphlet hadn't mentioned, "Oh, you're going to take really hard exams and they're graded on a curve." So that was, there's a lot of smarty pants taking those exams. So the good news is it got me into a great company. I sort of dropped out of that. I bobbed and weaved my way through a number of, roles I wasn't really qualified to do, but I figured it out and eventually joined one of their subsidiary companies. And they had acquired the company about 6 months earlier. And, you mentioned sort of interesting bumps. I mean, that was one time in my life where I had finally been leading a team. I had 40 people working for me before this transition. And did that for about 4 years, had the itch. And then when I was exploring this opportunity there and sort of being recruited a little bit, nobody was reporting to me. And, it's just one of those lessons, those moments that, the ego in me would have said, no, I can't go back into the address book where people will double click and sees nothing under me. But I think a little bit strategic in me knew that this was a place that was going to grow, that I was probably going to get promoted, that it had a good culture, was a growing industry. So I didn't take sort of that job that was great on paper. Of course, I didn't take a pay decrease, so that helped. But then over the next 3 or 4 years, people kept leaving. And every time they left, they were sort of like, why don't we put Erin into the role? And so I got promoted several times and eventually became interim CEO. And which is funny, I had a couple of funny moments, but I'll never forget the call I got, right? So you always get these calls at the most inopportune time. So my boss at the time, Steve, we were down in Florida visiting my parents, and we were getting ready to go out to a water park. And I hate theme parks. We're not big Disney people. We love a good water park. And so, but a water park, you're going without really your stuff. You're in your bathing suit. You're like checking out for the day. And I'm in the bedroom getting ready to walk out the door. And Steve calls to drop this news. Like, I'm being reassigned. We want to make you interim CEO. And then what I heard him say was something like, but we're going to still look for, somebody else to make sure there isn't anybody else better out there. Now, did he say it like that? Probably not. But I was like, oh, you sons of guns, right? Like, what the hell? But, and this is relevant to the story, I have this personal pattern. I talk about it in the new book, my PP. And my PP is that I hate competing on the usual. Because the competing on the usual means you got to work harder, you got to grind it out, you got to be better in all the traditional ways. And I just have never won that way. I've always sort of found a way to do things a little bit half different. And what I didn't realize right away, but then I realized, well, if they would have just gone through a normal process and had interviews and looked at resumes, like, I wouldn't have got the job. I was not meant, I didn't have the resume of a CEO. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. But because I was essentially by accident given the other path, which was, we're going to go do the traditional stuff while you run the company. And so it's now, apples and oranges. I was excited because I was like, okay, I'm just going to prove to them that I'm a badass and I can do this. And sort of that's what happened over the next 3 months. They sort of kicked butt. They sort of there was no other decision to make but keep me in that role. But the company was really not doing well. We were flat earnings for about 5 years. We had a terrible reputation for several years because it was an integration gone bad. I mean, everybody listening's probably been through one of those, like, let's buy this cool, sexy company and then like cut them off at the throat and not give them what they need to be successful. And then get pissed off when, they tick off our customers or they don't do things well. And we were kind of in that. But we had started to make a little bit of an operational turnaround, but financially we had no money to reinvest because we just, we kept, earnings were not growing. People, were frustrated. Employee engagement, of course, is correlated to that. People want to be winners. And despite not knowing what I was doing, I led the team for 3 years. And in 3 years, we tripled earnings. Took them from 17 to 50 million. Employee engagement went up 12 percentage points. The reality, though, David, is that all along the way, I still kind of felt like I was waiting to be found out, or I was getting lucky. My luck was going to run out. It wasn't imposter syndrome. It was more of like, I would look around the table at my peers and just see so much more sacrifice. So much, on a plane every week. Oh, I met with Jim out in, San Francisco. We had steak dinner. And I was like, I got 2 small kids. Like, I sent Brendan on a couple, I'll go like once a month to an office to a client. I had a friend that moved her family 3 times in 5 years to take on different assignments. I was like, I moved to Connecticut from Michigan. That's it. I'm done. Like, I've done my relocation. I'm settled. And so I was, our typical vision of success is, oh, you have to grind it out, especially as an executive, right? Like you got to give up all this other crap in order to be successful. So I thought, okay, well, I'm doing really well, but I'm not doing that stuff. And then I had this itch to leave. I had 22 years in the same parent company. I thought I wanted to do maybe CEO of a healthcare startup or just something a little more entrepreneurial, not so large. And I decided to retire. And when I retired, everybody kept saying the same thing. We'll miss your authentic leadership. And, it's kind of a buzzword, but it wasn't something people had called on me before. And after collecting about, 15, 20 of those, I was like, oh, wait, I wasn't going to be found out. I wasn't getting lucky. I was actually playing a totally different game than everybody else. And what I started to realize, and then, I'll stop telling this story, but like once I got time to reflect and started blogging and then started writing the book and doing the you know how it is. Like once you can slow down and pattern recognize, what I realized that got me so freaking fired up was that authenticity wasn't just this lovely, fluffy permission crap that made me feel better at work. Authenticity was actually a strategy. There was something, I started coining strategic authenticity, that there was something that had to be purposeful. That was the thing that got me the best talent, that got me through some really tough negotiations, that had executives at the company trusting me because I didn't bullshit them and I told stories and I went into those quarterly business reviews in a way that was different than everybody else. And so once I sort of realized that I had this like double-edged, I guess, good sword, I was like, oh crap, I gotta go teach people this.
So so at first you were a COO, correct?
Yes, I was.
And then you're promoted to interim CEO, and then CEO, and then rock star, and etc. While you were in your executive leadership roles, were you speaking? Were you blogging? Did you use any of the thought leadership strategies that you use now as an entrepreneur while you were still on the inside, or not really?
I love that question. The answer is mostly no. And the reflection I often has is I wish I would have. So, speaking definitely, we had some leadership events. I in a full circle moment, I was asked to speak at the actuarial every year had a big forum. And so this was years after I failed out of the program, and they asked me to come back and speak. And I thought, if this isn't a full circle, like I can't do the program, but I can be successful in the company. So it's a little bit of the speaking, but it's such a great question. I wish I had done more, and not just, yes, selfishly, if I then would have launched I would have had a better runway, but actually for the success of the business, if I had to go back and do it all over again, which I never will, I would have absolutely doubled down on the authenticity, and then like the thought leadership stuff that we see and in the world, in the entrepreneurship world we're in, and so many companies and executives in the more traditional, larger companies don't get the power up. So yeah, wish I would have done more.
Do you love selling? I know, me too. Do you hate selling? I know, me too. Listen, fantastic sales book you got to get your hands on. How do I know? It's mine. That's how. Do It Selling is now available for sale. Grab your copy, grab all the bonuses, all the companion tools, all the training, all the videos that go with it at doitselling.com. See you over there. Well, tell us a little bit about what was the impetus behind the first book? And then, of course, now we have to talk about the second book, the 50% Rule. But before we get there, you've really built an amazing company and empire, which we'll talk about in a moment. But would you say the book is really the foundational building block that everything else has been amplified and magnified from?
Yeah, and yes, and in a way that I don't think most people think or talk about it. So
Tell us about that.
I think that we've heard this. It's the best business card you'll ever write, right? It's credibility. Yes, is there some of that? But for me, especially for somebody like me, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners, like I am a creative, crazy-minded non-linear thinker. So I
Totally.
think big picture. And so having to slow the frick down. And I got lucky. COVID came and then I had, and so I had more time. That's when I wrote the first book. But having to slow my roll and really think about things, you inherently have to. Like, I can only type so fast, right? It's different than, oh, you were asking me to speak, I'll just throw some crap on on a slide and go. And so for me, it's really been more about my own brain being able to organize and structure, which then helps me communicate more effectively to my clients, to podcast audiences, to, people that read my blogs or et cetera.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, tell us a little bit about all the different ways that you share this message. So what is on the Erin and Company menu? How do clients and audiences tap in? What does small look like? What does medium look like? What does large look like? What does supersize look like?
Yeah, and that's another good question, and you've obviously really helped shape this. Just to go back a little bit to your question, but to sort of build this up, when I wrote You Do You-ish, which is really about this concept of using authenticity as a strategy and the benefits that it brings to you, and what is a framework to start to reprogram our bad habits in the working world of inauthenticity and going through the motions and saying a bunch of bullshit words and all that kind of stuff. And when I first started out, sort of one of the things that actually screwed me up a little bit, and you don't teach this quite as much, but there was this whole notion of like, you solve one problem. You just solve one problem. And I was like, I solve so many. Like, I don't understand how I can pick one problem. And so I think, and that's why I have the 50% rule. Don't ever take advice fully, like think about the intent and do it your own way, but we'll get there. And so when I did that, like the most obvious problem was, it was sort of culture, leadership, because it's such a big issue. There's just so much crappiness out there, and there's just so much data around it. And so, the first couple of years, I spent most of my time positioning and speaking sort of in the context of like, how do you make people better leaders? How do you make better culture and better careers? So I call it kind of the HRE side of things, which there's nothing wrong with. It's important. But one, I felt a little bit, I don't want to say empty, but not filled for that, because I'm a businesswoman. I came from running a company, and being 2 degrees of separation from the results is just not my favorite. I like to be 1 degree. I like to be, I do X, we grow sales, we grow, right? Yeah. And it wasn't until I was hired by a large Fortune 250 company to work with their sales team and do some of the stuff that I was like, oh my God, you idiot. I mean, I talk about authenticity, but I'm really, David, in the business of trust, connection, and differentiation. And the same things I teach HRE and internally are exactly, if not more, needed for sales, business development, sort of that external world. So once I sort of started to have that ridiculous epiphany, because it's so, and I think part of it was, I don't want to be too many things to too many people, but you can still niche in different ways, like you teach, right? It was really about industry, which you helped me understand. Okay, it's really B2B, and it's mostly healthcare, insurance. But then in terms of services, I mean, one of the things that, part of your program was so helpful, and it's sort of ridiculous that I needed it. I think everybody feels, right? Because it's like, we think we know everything. I ran a big company, and like, this stuff is so obvious, was to really understand the building blocks. And for me, how I 50% ruled what you taught. You teach sort of the different levels. I started to realize that my levels weren't so much about products, which was so helpful, because then if they're about products, I always felt like, I need to upsell, I need to do the next thing. And so where I landed that might be helpful for your listeners is, I realized that, okay, where was I spending most of my time? It was, keynote speaking and workshops. And I started to call that, that's where I'm infusion. Like, I come in, I'm a shot in the arm, I fire your people up, I give them something new to think about. Then you're on your own, right? Whether they read the book or you have some sort of support mechanism, you probably don't, right? Then it'll come and it'll go. And there was, you always have like those super go-getters that write you and are practicing it, but that's, So I thought, okay, so infusion. So what would the next level be? Not products and services, but like, and so I was like, it's application. And again, I'm not making up anything nobody's ever thought of. But for me, this sort of infusion pyramid, then application. And then I thought, well, how am I doing that today? And how do I want to do it more? So I was doing, I call it coach consulting with presidents, CEOs of sort of small to mid-sized companies. To me, that was kind of one version of application. Yep. I had also been doing group workshops where the humans framework that I teach, we would spend a session on each letter. It was a deeper dive. It was sort of a continuation. But then once I said, okay, it's application, how else would I apply it? I actually added another sort of service, which I'm calling these win rooms that I'm doing with companies now, where I say, okay, I taught you out, especially externally facing, how to, rewrite your RFPs or think about opening with an intriguing intro and a sales discussion. Instead of, we went through that, but let's apply that. You've got a real life situation, a real life customer. And so let's do some more real-time coaching. So that's sort of the second layer. And that was a big part of, just being in your programs and you saying, look, there's a million ways you can do this, take and pick from others. And then the last layer, which I just landed this summer, my first client to do is immersion, I'm calling it. So that's just saying, okay, well, what would be the next thing? The next thing would be getting all up in their business. Maybe some would call it consulting. I don't, because I don't like normal. So it's really saying not only how do we apply it, but how do we differentiate you with authenticity? And how do I get into, I'm working with an insurance company. How do I look at your policies, so not just your website, but your policies, your internal hiring practices? How do we come up with a unique differentiator? So for me, that's really, I either infuse you, I help you apply it, or for a few companies, I can get all up in your business and immerse with my services to really help you stand out.
Yeah, no, it sounds amazing. It's great. I'm curious, as you're speaking and coaching and immersing all around the country, have you found either some specific leaders or some specific companies, maybe they're clients, maybe they're not, but ones that you really hold up as heroes of authenticity that really have this dialed in and they're maximizing it in all the positive ways?
Yeah, I would say one in particular, the Hartford. I've been doing a lot of work with them. They have really realized that I can be a strategic secret weapon for them in more than just the infusion, and so they've done a really good job of sort of taking sort of my IP and what I do best, but then also doing their own creative. Okay, we've got this. So I'm working with them in a couple of weeks on their regional sales executive leadership team. And we're doing stuff around tough conversations, but in an authentic way. I've coached some of their leaders to give better presentation. So it's a little bit outside of my standard, but all the thread is always authenticity. So I think they're a company who has realized they have a really good culture, and they are, from a product service platform, they are ahead. And so those are the best companies where let's put the accelerator on and let's really differentiate with our how, not just our what. There's another company that really stands out too, Locked In, who I did they're in the benefits consulting space, a similar space as the Hartford, but on the consulting side. And I was so impressed when I spoke I did a keynote for them in May, and now potentially I'm doing another one in November for another side of their house. The way that they infused it into their day completely. It was funny. I actually had a speaking bureau that I work with come to that event to see me in person. It was our first time meeting in person. I knew they're in Kansas City, right? And that's something we as speakers do, right? Oh, we're going to be there. Come see me. And afterwards, she says to me, oh, she's like, it's so great, blah, blah, blah. She goes, but obviously they would pick you because their whole theme was authenticity. And I said, Brittany, their theme was not authenticity until they picked me. And then we worked together. We did some unique, we did this authentic tactile, and what was my favorite thing to see transpire, and we just talked about this on a call last week as we're looking at another speaking opportunity with them. They immediately they had a panel. People were like, you know what? Let me tell you a story because Erin taught me this. And then their head of communications went up and she's like, okay, forget the slides I was going to do. I'm going to do it this way because Erin just taught us that blah, 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 blah. And so for, 4 hours, because it's a half day event, I had kicked it off. I watched them infuse it in real time. And that's why I was so impressed. And I know that they're continuing to bring it forward and potentially bring me in again. So yeah, I mean, there's definitely some companies that, I mean, what's most interesting for me though, is how various industries so I was really nervous the first couple of times where I went to the more stodgy crowds, right? So, I have a nuclear submarine company, special military ops, so Green Berets and that group that were transitioning to corporate world. I spoke for them, and I couldn't believe it's gender neutral, it's the position neutral. And that's probably my favorite is each time I'm challenged with yet another group where I'm like, I don't know. Or a lot of times I'll hear the leads go, we're really tough though. We have a bunch of engineers. And I was like, you have no idea how much they want and crave this. And this message will resonate because they're humans.
Yeah, no, that's so funny. I was going to actually ask if there are certain professions or certain industries where you found this really surprising how much they crave it or how well they resonate with it. And I think you just answered that, but I'm surprised that you're still surprised. I mean, a lot of people that are leading a movement, like you're leading a movement, be like, oh my God, everyone needs this, from the boardroom to the break room, retail, Johnny Lunchbox and the factory people and, the leadership people and the C-suite people and, everyone in the field and everyone in the office and all the sales teams. I think it's you are being authentically humble by saying that it still surprises you how much they resonate with it. Do you ever have to do a little bit of convincing or persuading or explaining? And if you do have to do a little bit of convincing and explaining, does that maybe indicate that they're not a great group for you?
Yes, that's a great question. So I'll tell you a couple stories. The first story was the most recent, and then I'll go backwards. I was in Whistler, Canada, with a group of about 100 or so CEOs of sort of tech startups. And I was towards the end of the program, so that, they were getting a little sassier, probably a little more restless. And I was not even out of sort of my introduction period. Like I wasn't even into the content yet, right? And this guy raises his hand. And I was like, okay, a little awkward, but I'm not going to ignore the CEO. Okay, what say you, right? And he says, well, again, I hadn't even defined it. Like I define authenticity in a way that like unlocks people. Like I hadn't even gotten to the stuff that like transforms. So he says, I mean, isn't it obvious that we as CEOs have to be authentic? I mean, like you can't not be. And I said, yes, but you're not. And he just looked at me and I said, here's the truth. You think you're authentic. In many places you are. So in one-on-one conversations with your team, almost everybody is authentic. But where you have the opportunity, and that is really where you're not, is where you face off. So what happens, especially in larger companies, but still in smaller, like then those CEOs get scrubbed. They're handlers, right? They're corporate comms people, they're chiefs of staffs who write their talking points. So they go to the town hall, they go to the board meeting, the emails come out, and all of a sudden they think they're being authentic, but don't realize that the crap that is going out that represents them is as inauthentic as they come. Yeah. Or in their business, right? In their RFP responses and their sales, things like that. So, I mean, one of the things that I think, sometimes I have to make some convincing that there are opportunities. Like you think you're authentic because you're only thinking about the easy places. You're not thinking about the harder places. And that's actually what I'm trying to transform. And the really great companies look well beyond like how they're acting in their one-on-ones or their internal meetings. Yeah. I also had a really great one pushback that I love to tell this story. So I was doing a virtual 2-workshop session with C-suite level, also benefit consultants, not locked in a different group. And it was right around Thanksgiving. And we did the first session was, lecture and discussion was like 90 minutes and reframing the definition and talking about the tangibility and the benefits and blah, blah, blah. Totally bought in. Drinking the Kool-Aid like no tomorrow. We come back after Thanksgiving, we had strategically done another session, which was more, they were supposed to experiment, bring back, it was a little more of a facilitation and application, right? And this guy who had been like my big supporter, been super engaged. One of the executives was like, 5 minutes in, he's like, yeah, but Erin, you don't understand, which I always love because I'm like, yeah, I was an executive. I do. He said, we meet all the time with these CEOs or these people we don't know, and we don't know if they want authenticity. And before I could respond, I could see one of the women in the boxes, one of his peers, light up. And she's like, oh my God, I have to tell this story. And so she tells the story of the week prior, Wednesday before Thanksgiving. Her mom was in town, but she had this meeting with the CEO. She'd been trying to get it forever. You know how it is. Oh yeah, I can meet with Wednesday at 1:00 before Thanksgiving when everybody wants to just turn into like a 12-year-old and be in their pajamas and right. And so she had to take this meeting. Well, her mother was a former pastry chef and had 2 new recipes she was telling us about adding Bailey's and Kahlua to her pies. And the problem was her mom had to run to the store and said, can you take the pies out of the oven? And when she left, she realized that the very time that she had to take them out of the oven was also the time she was supposed to get on this call. So she had a big decision to make. So as you can imagine, she's telling the story. We're like on our edge of our seat. We're like, pick the pie, pick the pie, pick the pie. You better freaking pick the pie. So she says, I decided to take the pies out. And then I run and I like slide into my seat and I click on the Zoom, and immediately I didn't have time to think. And I just kind of blurted out, sorry, I'm late. I was taking my mother's pies out of the da-da-da. And she said, she looks at us, she goes, first of all, this CEO is normally, and she like purses her face and lips. So she like, indicates that this is a pretty like stodgy guy. And she said, I said that. And next thing you know, he's talking about his grandmother's pies and we're talking about this pie. And she said, by the end of the conversation, he said to me, you better, in that proposal you guys are sending, you better put those pies in there as part of, the proposal. Right. And there was just this tremendous connection. And what I tell people all the time, to mix metaphors, it's like if you go to a birthday party with the kids and they finish their activity and then they get their pizza and then they get their cake comes around, right? And all the kids are like, can I have another piece? Can I have more ice cream, right? And the parents awkwardly stand around the outside. And when they get done serving the cake, they always have leftovers and they'll come around and they'll say, hey, David, would you like a piece of cake? Now, what do most people say? Most people say, no, thank you, right? Like, no, thank you. I'm good. I'm good, right? But what are most people thinking?
Yes, I want the damn cake.
That is authenticity in the workplace. Everybody wants the damn cake. You just got to serve it. You got to eat it.
Hey, if you're loving this episode as much as I am, pop over to doitmarketing.com/manifesto and get your free 37-page download guide to how to sell smarter, sell more easily, sell more often. That's what we're here to help you with at The Selling Show. Off you go. Tell us about the 50% rule. Is this an expansion, an extension, a subset, a superset? What is this relative to the authenticity empire? Well, first of all, tell us the premise of the book and the message, but I'm also curious where this fits into your empire.
Yeah, so it is definitely an extension. I'll tell the story. So while I was, ass kicking, sass kicking out there, doing the TED Talk, writing the book, I, at the same time, was learning how to become an entrepreneur. And I had joined a program, not yours yet, but and it was at this 2-day offsite in Nashville. And, we have to learn all the things. And they had delivered like an 84-page, beautiful PowerPoint on how to, I think it was maybe build your speaking career. And I remember sitting there and I should have been thrilled, but I was paralyzed. And I remember thinking, and then we go to the worst places. Oh my God, I sprinted my whole career. I've been successful, but now I'm lazy and I've like run out of steam and I'm no longer going to be able to do big thing. And like, I'm, blah, 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 right? The sucky songs, as I call them. And then I finally like simmered down and I thought, well, what if you 50% rule this? And the concept essentially is, what if I give myself permission to only take about half of what they teach me? And purposely throughout the half that feels inauthentic, feels slimy, feels like something I don't want to do, feels like there's better ideas, that maybe it's something that probably like I wouldn't, that marketing technique wouldn't work for me. And then leave room, they'll bring in your own ideas, right? Don't just half-ass it, bring in other ideas, curate your own ideas. And as soon as I did that, I could feel this, like I literally went from like paralyzed and dread to like being excited and, oh my God, this is so motivating. And I love and I talk about in the book, self-determination theory is behind this. Like, we want to work on things where we at least have partial say and autonomy in what we do. So doing great, but not enough to write a book. I came home, I would use it, I would forget about it. I would get stuck for like a month on something. Then I would be like, oh, 50% rule it. And then I started doing it so much for myself. People would come to me and they'd be stuck on something. And I'm like, well, why don't you just 50% rule it? And they would like lean in and be like, huh? And I would explain, anytime you're getting advice and then doing something new, listening to a podcast, looking at the playbook, only take about half and then bring in your other half. And it just like unlocked people as this nomenclature. Still not enough for a book. Where things really got super cool was then, I've been saying it so much that I started to like all of a sudden observe it in the wild everywhere. So I was sitting at Hamilton, the Bushnell Theater here in Hartford, Connecticut, and mind blown, of course. And I was like, oh my God, Lin-Manuel Miranda 50% ruled Hamilton. He took half normal and merged it with half new. And that's why it's so successful. I mean, yes, it's super creative, but and then I started seeing it in Weird Al Yankovic. I'm like, he's a terrible singer and he's a superstar. Why? He 50% ruled music. I saw it with the Savannah Bananas and their explosive growth when they finally decided to 50% rule the game of baseball and actually change the game, not just make it more entertaining and be better at the entertaining, but when they 50% ruled the rules in the game and went all in on Banana Ball, like look at them now. They're on ESPN and they've got documentary and they're in the Hall of Fame. And so I saw it, there. I saw it with Whitney Houston. I started to see all of these examples, and what started as a simple sort of self-help tool really turned into a formula that can help people go from underdog to unmatched, is what I call it, or really compete in a league of their own. And I realized that personal pattern, that PP that I mentioned at the beginning about how I hate to compete and the usual, this was like the formula. And I had used it sometimes, but I was like, oh, now if I know this, I can do it even more. So every time I do something, the best way to sort of get ahead is to 50% rule the way it's done before. And not only will I be more motivated, but I will stand out. I will grab attention because people are yearning for that. And that's that. And then I was like, oh God, this is the book. This is the next book.
Very, very exciting. And so this, I mean, to me, the way you describe it, it's a combination of authenticity and differentiation.
Yeah.
And also personalization, right? So taking, any topic, leadership, innovation, corporate strategy, sales. Yes, there are frameworks, but every framework is dying to be customized and personalized and internalized. And if you take it as stock, your entire life, your entire business is going to be basically a template that is untouched, uncustomized, unaltered, and it's going to look like everyone else's template.
Yep.
So you take half the template and you fill it in, even in the kitchen. So at our house, we call this, you have a recipe, but you're sort of, we call it cooking with love. I don't have oregano. I'm going to throw in a little bit of basil. You know what? We're out of sour cream, but Greek yogurt would be great in here. It calls for garbanzo beans, but I got this other kind of beans. And you make it, and it's equally delicious, if not more so, because you are cooking with love and you are not lockstep following the written recipe exactly as written.
That's exactly right. And what I've found is when I talk about this concept to people, there's not one person that says, oh, I never do this. Oh, what a great idea. You just discovered, like I say in the book, like, I don't want to pretend, like, I want to settle this right now. This is nothing new. It's not like I found the first tailbone of a dinosaur and then you find out, oh no, there's like 1,000 of them found. They're just called coccyx bones. What I found is that we don't do it enough is really the simple answer. So and I can say this with 100% certainty, because even when I was writing the book, there was crap where I was like, oh, you idiot, why didn't you 50% rule it? And what I love about the book is there are so many stories and lessons and sort of derivative. So for example, when I tell the story about Lin-Manuel Miranda, it has sort of a sub-principle. And that sub-principle is around juxtapositions. And the saying I use is juxtapositions create joyful jolts. And so like there are 6 different principles then are throughout the stories and the lessons, because it's sort of organized by 50% your personal growth, 50% your leadership, 50% your business growth, to your point about innovation, and 50% your personal life, but there's also like from the stories, and there are some derivatives of the 50% rule that then also help you go, okay, I can put this on supercharge because I understand sort of some of the underlying ways in which to like create the reaction in everything I do and at a level that's, something I don't normally think about.
Well, we could just keep going forever. We got to land this plane. I know that people are going to want to get connected and stay connected to more Erin brilliance. Where can we send people? What links should they look for in the show notes?
Yeah, I would say that. So the first thing is find me on LinkedIn if you want to interact as a human. If you can spell my name, you could find me, although the show notes would be helpful. I'm the only Erin Hatzikostas in the world, or at least on the internet. And then I have an authenticity playbook that you can find on beauthentic.inc.com or /playbook. And that's a really great, it's 10 simple ways to start doing authenticity strategically, tangibly in your everyday life. So I highly recommend that. And then I would say if you're a podcast listener and you've, completely binged every one of these podcast episodes, you could also, our podcast is now called Because Erin, it's not Because Erin and Nicole, it's Because Work Doesn't Have to Suck. So just the letter B, cause CAUSE, work doesn't have to suck. And so since I know you're got your earbuds in, that's a great place to consume more podcasts as well. We love jamming out on that, and we have a lot of fun. And as I said, it's kind of offbeat. There's a lot of humor and ridiculousness.
I think you maybe 50% ruled the podcast world.
Totally did. We did.
There you go.
Every other episode roughly is a interview, but then we also, my good friend and I, my friend Nicole, who is Mensa level intelligence, Yale, Johns Hopkins, and also the most wildly inappropriate Italian human you've ever met. She was very 50% ruled. We jam on sort of common topics, her own work, issues and other things as well, and have fun with it. So yeah, that was our way to 50% rule it.
Very nice. Totally amazing. Well, Erin, thank you so much for being with us and sharing all of these value bombs. This will be an episode that folks, you're going to want to re-listen, rewind, get off the treadmill, pull the car over to the side of the road, get out a notebook, get out a pen, hit the rewind button or the replay button, and grab these gems and then connect with Erin. All of those links are going to be in the show notes right below this episode at thesellingshow.com. Erin, I appreciate you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, David. I appreciate you too.
And that wraps up another episode of The Selling Show. Hey, tell you what, if you like us, rate us and review us on Apple Podcasts, subscribe, tell a friend, go grab the notes and downloads and extras at thesellingshow.com. See you next time.